Paul Riley and myself are going to give you who the Jets are now taking at 13. Or will they stay at even 13? Matt Reynolds joined us on our Wednesday show, and we're going to tell you what he spoke about from the Green Bay Packers side of things now on JetCast. Hey guys, what's going on? As always, I am Ray. I'm joined today by the infamous Paul Riley. Paul, what's going on?
Well, Ray, we had a very good Twitter Space show Wednesday with Matt Reynolds from CBS in Green Bay, and he told us some things that were news, and people really seemed to enjoy that show. Matt stayed with us for almost an hour and a half, and we can't promise such an interesting guest every Wednesday, but we can promise you we'll have you and I every Wednesday to talk about Jet-related issues, and we will try to bring guests like that going forward. But he actually told us some news with respect to the Jets and the Packers and what's going on with the Rodgers proposed trade.
So why don't we get into who Matt Reynolds is? You want to get a little into his background before we get into the conversation that we had with him?
Yeah, Matt Reynolds is a real young guy, and he's a CBS sports anchor in Green Bay by way of Nebraska. He sort of hinted that he may be moving on, actually, at the end of the show. I think he's a guy who's probably got a pretty bright future in front of him, but he really, really knows what's going on, not only around the Green Bay, but in the NFL. You could tell that by his response to questions regarding some of the cap hits of various players. But the one piece of news he broke right at the very beginning, I asked him, I said, we hear reports that the Jets and the Packers haven't talked in weeks. And he said, that's not true. He said, they've never stopped talking. They just, they're in a disagreement, but they've never stopped talking. And that makes a lot more sense to me than, than the two of them just wouldn't discuss this with each other. The general managers are friendly, and we know the coaches are friendly. So what he said there made a lot of sense. And then after that, he just addressed, we asked him some questions about what he observed last year from Rodgers. And he said he doesn't think age has caught up to him. He thinks it was a combination of the talent or lack thereof around him. And he said he truly broke his thumb. He said that thumb was broken in that last play, week 5 against the Giants. And it really hampered him tremendously during the season. So that's what, if you're a Jet fan, those are good things to hear, because it tells you that Father Time hasn't, caused him to fall off a cliff from an MVP year to last year.
Right, and one thing that I know I asked him when we were talking is, how is Rodgers perceived in the locker room? We hear in the media everything going on with the COVID situation. There's always drama being, around the team, and he's on the field, he's in the locker room. So I said, what take do you get? And you know what he said? He said his teammates love him. Like, there's no doubt about his teammates love him. They know how great he is. Yeah, is he a little bit of a character? Sure, but his teammates adore him. Alan Lazard's already practicing with him, doing off-season drills. So it's like, that's one worry that I had, was, is he an absolute prima donna? And I take a couple things I take away from, Rodgers will absolutely show up for off-season OTAs. They brought in the quarterback Boyle because he knows that the Hackett offense. So things are pointing in a positive direction. And we've seen a couple new things come about this week. Some of these conflicting reports, I'll say, is that now supposedly Green Bay is willing to do the compensation if Aaron Rodgers retires after 1 year for the 2025 compensation. But in order to do that compensation, Green Bay's looking for a fully guaranteed, no questions asked first round pick in 2024, and I just don't see the leverage they have to ask for something like that.
I agree with you. I think the Jets are pretty adamant. The only way they're getting a first round pick is if the Jets' performance under Rodgers earns them a first round pick. I mean, I think the Jets would happily give up a number 1 next year if they made the AFC Championship game. I don't think they'd even blink. They'd be glad. But between now and the draft, there'll be a lot of other rumors floating around. One of the things we discussed with Matt, and you and I have discussed in our Spaces show, somebody said something that I found kind of interesting. I hadn't thought of it. They said Green Bay may want to wait until the Jets are on the clock at 13. because if there's a player they really want at 13 and they're concerned someone could jump into the 14th slot between them and the Jets, 13 and 15, and grab that player, they may ask the Jets to flip 13 and 15, and in return not demand such a high pick in 2024. I think they're always going to get a second round pick this year, but I hadn't thought of that, and that makes a lot of sense to me. If you're Green Bay, why not wait and see where you are? What if a terrific player they're really interested in on defense drops to 13? They don't want any other team to get that player. Well, they can be certain they'll get him because the Jets will flip with him. That's the equivalent of a third-round pick if you use the draft calculator. So, that's something Reynolds said. Yeah, he said, he hadn't thought of that either. But it's an interesting idea. I still think this will go until draft night. I'm convinced more than ever that this we'll find out something.
Drama again. 2 years in a row with the drama. But I will say this. I'm like everybody else. I sift through every mock draft. Hell, I did my own mock draft. If you want to see that, you just go to JetCastPod.com and check out that mock draft. I actually have us taking Nolan Smith at 13, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Because almost every mock draft that we see going around, the top two tackles are off the board. And I see a lot of fans out there saying, well, there's 4 top tackles in this draft. Doesn't mean that they're worth the 13th overall pick. I see a lot of teams saying, let's take Broderick Jones. I think he's a complete reach there. And then I got to one of the CBS mock drafts, Chris Trapasso, and I think it's more realistic. He has us trading back to 18 and Detroit moving up to 13, and then the Jets taking Broderick Jones at 18, which to me makes a lot of sense because one thing that Douglas has constantly done, if he's got to give up draft capital, he gets it back somewhere else. Like we've seen, he's already prepared to give away the second round pick this year, but it's really a third round pick because he gave away Elijah Moore in that trade. So if he's going to pick up draft capital, I can see it maybe going towards next year where, he might not have a first or a second round pick.
Maybe. I just think if you want Broderick Jones and you're the New York Jets and he's sitting there at 13, you better take him. There's no guarantee he's going to be there if you trade down. We did matching mock drafts, and I had Jones going to them. I think that the guy who you hear, and you follow the media, shooting up the draft boards is Wright from Tennessee, the offensive
Darnell
line.
Wright. No thanks.
I'm going to push Jones down, and I think if you assume the 4 quarterbacks go, I believe a team's going to gamble on Robinson and draft a running back that high. I really do. Mm-hmm. And so I think certainly Jones could be there for the Jets. I thought you were crazy, but now I've seen a lot of people who apparently are crazy too, because they also have the Jets taking Smith. And I understand the logic behind it. He gets a chance to be an absolute game breaker as a pass rusher, and there aren't so many of those guys. They don't grow on trees, and you don't find them in the 4th round. So maybe that'll happen. But this is mock draft season, and these next 2 weeks are going to be particularly interesting because some teams are going to make trades so they can get themselves sort of locked into a spot where they think a particular player might be. And the next 2 Wednesdays, we're certainly going to discuss the draft, I think, unless Rodgers gets traded, as the main topic on our show. And, you and I did the matching mock drafts. I mean, we'll probably discuss more of who the Jets realistically could get at 13 and at 42 or 43. I don't think you're going to have them both. I think one of them's gone. But, what if Green Bay just doesn't make a trade for picks this year? What if they want to make a trade for picks next year and in 25? I can't imagine that. But if the Jets do end up having both 42 and 43, then they are able to load up even more this year. I don't see that happening. I think it would be irresponsible for Green Bay, knowing they have to trade the guy at some point, to give up a draft pick this year when they know where the Jets are going to draft. They know the Jets draft 42, 43. They know that. They don't know where they're going to draft next year. Right. They might draft 63. They just don't know. So the next few weeks are going to be fun, but also a little nerve-wracking if you're a Jet fan because you keep waiting for the other shoe to drop from Green Bay.
Right, and what you said, I don't think he's going towards draft night. I seen earlier today, you see some of these NFL outlets. I believe this was PFF who put it out there. If you're the New York Jets, would you consider moving into the top 10 and giving up your third round pick to go get Carter out of Georgia, the defensive tackle? I think he's a special talent.
They already lost their third round pick. So, you know what I'm saying?
Well, no, sorry, the second round pick it would cost you. So I'm like, so you'd have one pick in the top 3 rounds? For me, that's not a Joe Douglas type move. It's just not.
Right. I think, some team may try to move up to draft Carter if he falls. I don't think Carter's falling. I think the Detroit Lions are going to take him. I thought that all along. In fact, I think maybe a team tries to jump into that 3 slot that Arizona's sitting in because they don't need a quarterback. I mean, whatever you think about Murray, they're married to him. So, I just never see Carter, even with all the baggage that people throw at him. He's probably the best player.
Right.
He probably is, regardless of position.
That'd be a hell of a defensive line over there, Detroit.
Yeah. I just think he won't get past Detroit. That's my opinion. But we'll have the next couple of weeks to discuss that too.
And there's players that always drop every year. I mean, sure. I remember the Kyle Hamilton draft. Everybody had us taking him. Nobody had us taking Garrett Wilson. It was always Jamison Williams. Not a lot of people had the wide receiver going to Atlanta last year prior to Garrett Wilson. How many people had Sauce Gardner going 4th overall? Or even
Buckley going in front of Gardner. I mean, Houston did the Jets the ultimate favor because they drafted Buckley. They were drafting a corner, and they took Buckley. They could have had Gardner. There was no ifs, ands, or buts.
It's so strange because he was coming off such a big injury. He hasn't played in almost 2 years, for crying out loud.
We'll never know this, but I'm curious who the Jets would have picked it for if Wilson was gone.
I think it was Thibodeau. I think without a doubt it was Thibodeau.
Maybe, yeah.
They were going best player available. We heard what Saleh said in the press conference prior to the draft. We'll take a defensive back, but they better be an absolute unicorn because at that position you take best player available. So I think it was probably Sauce and Tibbs.
I don't think Buckley. I think that I'm still shocked that Houston did when they took him. I couldn't believe it. I thought, excuse me.
I know. All right, everybody. I appreciate your time today.
Yep. We'll catch up to you Wednesday nights.